There are people who come into your life loudly, with grand promises, constant attention, and words that feel like fireworks. And then there are avoidants, quiet, guarded, hard to read. They don't overwhelm you with affection. They don't always say what you want to hear. They often seem distant, even when they care deeply. Because of that, many people misunderstand them, misjudge them, or give up on them too soon. But here's a truth most people never realize until it's too late. When an avoidant truly cares about you, the way they show it is rare, subtle, and incredibly valuable. And if you lose an avoidant who does certain things for you, you may never meet another one like them again. Avoidants are not naturally comfortable with emotional closeness. Intimacy feels risky to them. Dependence feels dangerous. They often learned early in life that relying on others leads to disappointment, rejection, or loss of control. So they built walls. They taught themselves to stay self-sufficient, emotionally contained, and distant enough to stay safe. That's their normal state. That's their comfort zone. And that's why when an avoidant starts doing certain things for you, it's not casual. It's not automatic. It's not something they do for everyone. It means something deeper is happening beneath the surface. Most people only focus on what avoidants don't do. They don't text all the time. They don't express feelings easily. They don't chase. They don't beg. They don't constantly reassure. And because of that, they get labeled as cold, uninterested, or emotionally unavailable. The truth is, avoidants do show love. They just do it in ways that are quieter, less obvious, and far more meaningful than dramatic gestures. Their love lives in actions, not in big emotional speeches. It shows up in consistency, in effort, in the small ways they step outside their comfort zone for someone they truly value. So if you have an avoidant in your life who is doing certain rare things for you, you need to pay attention, because these actions are not random. They are not accidental. They are signs of emotional investment. They are proof that in their own guarded way, they are choosing you. And when an avoidant chooses someone, it's not because they need them, it's because they trust them. And trust for an avoidant is one of the hardest things to give. The first rare thing an avoidant does when they truly care about you is letting you into their private world. Avoidants are extremely protective of their personal space, routines, and inner thoughts. Their life is often structured around independence. They like knowing they can handle things on their own. They don't easily invite people into their inner circle, because that means losing a bit of control. That means exposing parts of themselves they usually keep hidden. So when an avoidant starts sharing pieces of their world with you, it's a big deal. Maybe they show you where they like to spend their quiet time. Maybe they talk about their past. Maybe they open up about their struggles, their fears, or their dreams. Maybe they invite you into spaces they normally keep to themselves, to someone else. These things might seem small or normal, but for an avoidant, it takes courage. They don't open up because it feels good. They open up because you feel safe, and safety is rare for them. If they let you into their private world, it means you've crossed a boundary that most people never get past. It means they see something different in you. It means on some level they believe you won't hurt them the way others might have. The second rare thing is when they stay during uncomfortable conversations. Avoidants hate emotional tension. They hate feeling trapped in heavy discussions. When conflict arises, their natural instinct is to shut down, withdraw, or escape. Not because they don't care, but because emotional intensity overwhelms them. It feels like losing control, and that's one of their biggest fears. So if an avoidant stays during a difficult conversation instead of disappearing, that's not normal behavior for them. That's effort. That's growth. That's emotional risk. It means they care enough about you and the relationship to face something that makes them deeply uncomfortable. Maybe they don't say everything perfectly. Maybe they stumble over their words. Maybe they look distant or quiet while you're talking. But the fact that they're still there, still listening, still trying to engage is significant. They're choosing connection over escape. And for an avoidant, that choice doesn't come easily. Many people make the mistake of focusing only on how emotional or expressive the conversation is, but with an avoidant, the real sign of care is presence. If they're still there, still trying, still willing to have the conversation at all, it means you matter to them more than their comfort. The third rare thing is when they check on you in quiet ways. Avoidants are not always verbally affectionate. They may not send long emotional messages or constantly ask how you feel, but when they care, they often show it through subtle actions. Maybe they remember something important you mentioned weeks ago. Maybe they send a short message asking if you got home safely. Maybe they help you with something practical without making a big deal out of it. Maybe they notice when you're stressed and try to make your day a little easier in small ways. To others, these gestures might seem ordinary, but for an avoidant, they're meaningful because they don't like feeling responsible for someone else's emotions. They don't naturally move toward emotional caretaking. So when they do, it's intentional. It's a sign that they're thinking about you, even when they're not saying much. Avoidants often care deeply, but silently. Their affection lives in the background. It's not loud or dramatic. It's steady, subtle, and easy to overlook. But if you pay attention, you'll notice a pattern. You'll see that they're there for you in practical, consistent ways. And that kind of quiet loyalty is something many people never experience. The fourth rare thing is when they try to explain their feelings. This is one of the hardest things for an avoidant to do. Many avoidants struggle to even identify what they're feeling, let alone talk about it. Emotions can feel confusing, overwhelming, or even threatening, so they often keep them buried. That's why when an avoidant attempts to explain their inner world, even if the words come out awkwardly or incomplete, it's incredibly significant. It means they're trying to bridge the emotional gap. It means they're letting you see a part of them they usually keep hidden. They might say things like, "I'm not good at this," or "I don't know how to explain it," or "I just need some space, but it doesn't mean I don't care." These statements may not sound romantic or poetic, but they carry emotional weight. They are honest. They are vulnerable in their own way. For an avoidant, explaining feelings feels like standing without armor. It feels exposed. So if they're doing it with you, it means they trust you enough to take that risk. And that trust is not something they give lightly. The fifth rare thing is when they include you in future plans. Avoidants are often very present-focused when it comes to relationships. Thinking too far ahead can make them feel trapped or pressured. Commitment in their mind can feel like losing freedom. So they tend to avoid making big promises about the future. But when an avoidant starts talking about plans that include you, even small ones, it's meaningful. Maybe they mention a trip you could take together. Maybe they talk about something they want to do with you next month. Maybe they include you in their long-term ideas, even casually. These moments may seem simple, but for an avoidant, they represent emotional investment. They're not just thinking about their life anymore. They're thinking about a shared life, even if it's in small pieces. They're making space for you in a future that they usually keep independent. And that's not something they do with just anyone. Avoidants are careful about who they attach to. They don't want to feel dependent or emotionally entangled with the wrong person. So if they're picturing you in their future, it means they see you as someone safe, someone stable, someone worth that emotional risk. When an avoidant does these things, they're stepping outside their comfort zone again and again. They're letting you in. They're staying during hard moments. They're checking on you. They're explaining themselves. They're including you in their future. None of this is easy for them. None of it is automatic. So if you have an avoidant who does these things for you, don't take it lightly. Don't compare them to people who express love in louder ways. Don't assume their quiet effort means they care less. Sometimes the quietest love is the rarest. And sometimes the person who struggles the most to open up is the one who values the connection the deepest. And this is where many people make a mistake. They see these subtle efforts, but because they don't look dramatic or romantic in the traditional sense, they overlook them. They expect more words, more reassurance, more intensity. They compare the avoidant to people who love loudly, people who express everything instantly. And in that comparison, they miss the depth of what the avoidant is already giving. But if you look closely, if you pay attention to the patterns instead of the surface, you start to realize that what they're offering is rare. The sixth rare thing an avoidant does when they truly care about you is that they return after space without resentment. Avoidants need distance to regulate their emotions. When things feel too intense, too emotional, or too close, their instinct is to step back. Not because they want to punish you, not because they're playing games, but because their nervous system feels overwhelmed. Space is how they calm down. Space is how they think. Space is how they come back to themselves. But here's the difference between an avoidant who cares and one who doesn't. The one who cares comes back. They don't stay gone forever. They don't disappear and pretend you never existed. After they've had time to breathe, to process, to regain their emotional balance, they return. And when they return, they don't come back with bitterness or coldness. They come back as if the connection still matters. That return is a sign of emotional attachment. It means you're not just someone they can easily replace. It means the bond is strong enough to pull them back, even after distance. Many avoidants are used to detaching completely when things feel complicated. It's easier for them to cut off and move on. So when they come back to you, again and again, it shows that something about you feels different. The seventh rare thing is when they open up about their fears. Avoidants are masters at hiding vulnerability. They often present themselves as strong, independent, and unaffected. They don't like others seeing their insecurities because deep down they fear those insecurities could be used against them. They fear rejection. They fear being misunderstood. They fear being controlled or abandoned. So when an avoidant tells you what they're afraid of, it's not casual conversation. It's not just another topic. It's a window into the part of them they usually protect at all costs. Maybe they admit they're afraid of losing themselves in a relationship. Maybe they tell you they're scared of being hurt. Maybe they confess that closeness makes them anxious, even if they care deeply. These moments are rare because they require trust. They require the avoidant to believe that you won't judge them, mock them, or use their fears as weapons in future arguments. When they open up like this, they're handing you something fragile, and how you respond in those moments will shape the entire future of the relationship. If you respond with patience, understanding, and calm, they feel safer. But if you respond with criticism, pressure, or emotional intensity, they retreat. And once an avoidant retreats from that level of vulnerability, it's very hard to get them back there again. The eighth rare thing is when they choose you over their comfort zone. Avoidants live inside their comfort zones. Their routines, their independence, their emotional distance. These things keep them feeling safe. They know how to function alone. They know how to rely on themselves. That's their natural state. So when an avoidant starts making choices that prioritize the relationship, even when it feels uncomfortable, that's huge. Maybe they spend more time with you than they usually would with anyone. Maybe they show up to important events, even if social situations drain them. Maybe they try to communicate more than they're used to. Maybe they compromise on things that normally feel non-negotiable to them. Every one of those actions is a step outside their comfort zone. And avoidants don't step outside their comfort zones for just anyone. If they're doing it for you, it means the connection matters more to them than their usual emotional safety. It means they're willing to face discomfort to keep you in their life. And that's one of the clearest signs of emotional investment you'll ever see from an avoidant. Now, when you look at all 8 of these signs together, you start to understand something important. These behaviors are not normal for avoidants. They are not their default. They represent effort, vulnerability, and emotional risk. And that's exactly why they're so rare. Many avoidants go through life keeping everyone at arm's length. They date casually. They keep conversations light. They avoid emotional depth. They leave when things get too real. And because of that, they never form deep, lasting connections. Not because they don't want to, but because fear always wins. So when you meet an avoidant who is trying with you, who is showing these rare behaviors, it means you've reached a place in their world that very few people ever reach. You're not just another person passing through their life. You're someone who has touched something deeper inside them. And that's why losing an avoidant like this is different. When most people leave, they move on. They find someone else. They open up again. But avoidants don't work that way. When they open up to someone and it doesn't work out, it reinforces their deepest fears. It tells them that vulnerability leads to pain, that closeness leads to loss, that trusting someone was a mistake. So the next time, they become even more guarded, even more distant, even more careful about who they let in. Sometimes they never reach that same level of openness again, not because they don't feel, but because they're protecting themselves from the memory of what it felt like to lose someone they actually cared about. That's why these 8 signs matter so much. They are not just relationship behaviors. They are emotional milestones for an avoidant. Each one represents a barrier being lowered, a wall being softened, a fear being challenged. And if you have someone in your life who is doing these things for you, it means they're not just present, they're invested. They're trying in ways that may not always be obvious, but are deeply meaningful. The problem is, many people don't realize this until the avoidant is gone. They focus on what they weren't getting. They focus on the silence, the distance, the lack of constant reassurance, and they overlook the quiet loyalty, the subtle effort, the emotional risks the avoidant was taking behind the scenes. Then one day, the avoidant stops trying, they stop returning, they stop opening up, they retreat back into their safe, independent world. And that's when the realization hits that the person who seemed distant was actually giving something rare, something honest, something real. Because avoidants don't love loudly, they love carefully, they love quietly. And when they choose someone, it's not because they need them, it's because against all their instincts, they've decided that this person is worth the risk. And when an avoidant decides that you are worth the risk, you have to understand what that truly means. It means they are fighting against years of emotional conditioning. It means they are overriding instincts that once kept them safe. It means that every time they lean toward you instead of away, they are choosing growth over protection. That choice is not small, it is not casual. It is internal work that you may never fully see. The 11th thing you need to understand is why these signs are so rare in the first place. Avoidants are wired to survive emotionally on their own. Somewhere in their past, closeness either felt unreliable, overwhelming, or unsafe. So they adapted. They learned that independence equals safety. They learned that needing less means hurting less. They learned to downplay their own emotions before anyone else could dismiss them. So when an avoidant starts doing the things we've talked about, letting you in, staying during conflict, opening up about fears, including you in their future, they are actively challenging their own survival strategy. They are stepping into uncertainty, and uncertainty for them feels dangerous. That's why not every avoidant will reach this stage. Many will stay surface level forever. Many will leave the moment emotions deepen. Many will convince themselves that it's easier to be alone than to feel exposed. So if you are with an avoidant who is pushing past that instinct for you, you are witnessing something rare. You are witnessing emotional evolution. The 12th thing is what these actions reveal about their emotional investment. Avoidants don't invest lightly. They don't get attached quickly. They don't fall into dependency easily. In fact, they resist it. So if they are consistently showing up in these quiet but meaningful ways, it means the attachment has already formed. Even if they don't say the words often, even if they struggle to label what they feel. Attachment for an avoidant is shown through consistency, through returning, through allowing you closer than anyone else, through trying even when trying feels uncomfortable. And here's something many people don't realize. When an avoidant is emotionally invested, they often feel it more intensely than they show it. They just don't express it the way others do. They internalize it. They carry it silently. They think about you in moments you'll never know about. They replay conversations. They analyze interactions. They care deeply but privately. So when you see those rare signs, understand that they are the visible tip of something much deeper beneath the surface. The 13th thing is the emotional risk they are taking. For most people, vulnerability is scary, but for an avoidant, it can feel like losing control entirely. When they open up, they are exposing the parts of themselves they usually protect with distance. When they let you matter, they are accepting that you now have the power to hurt them. And that's terrifying for someone who built their entire identity around self-reliance. When they choose closeness with you, they are accepting a risk they normally avoid at all costs. They are saying, without always using words, "You matter enough for me to step into discomfort." That's powerful, that's rare, and that's something that shouldn't be taken lightly. Because once an avoidant feels deeply hurt after opening up, they don't just grieve the relationship, they reinforce their walls, they double down on independence, they remind themselves why they shouldn't have trusted in the first place. And next time, they may not even allow someone to get as close as you did. The 14th thing is why you may not notice their effort at first. The world teaches us that love looks loud, it looks like constant reassurance, it looks like dramatic gestures, it looks like emotional intensity. But avoidant love often looks calm, controlled, subtle. It looks like showing up even when they're tired. It looks like fixing something for you without being asked. It looks like remembering a detail you forgot you shared. It looks like sitting next to you quietly instead of needing constant stimulation. It looks like consistency instead of chaos. If you're used to loud love, avoidant love can feel underwhelming at first. But if you slow down and really observe, you'll see something steady underneath it. You'll see someone who doesn't promise the world, but who quietly integrates you into theirs. And that steadiness is something many people only appreciate after experiencing instability somewhere else. The 15th thing is the danger of taking them for granted. When someone loves loudly, you constantly feel reminded of their affection, but when someone loves quietly, you have to be attentive to recognize it. If you overlook their effort, criticize their slower emotional pace, or pressure them to become someone they're not, something shifts inside them. Avoidants are extremely sensitive to feeling inadequate. They already fear that they're not good at emotional intimacy. They already believe they might disappoint you, so if they sense that their effort isn't enough, they don't usually fight harder. They withdraw. They start telling themselves that no matter what they do, it won't be enough. They start feeling misunderstood, and slowly they return to the one place that always felt safe, their independence. And here's the painful part. They won't always tell you when they're reaching that point. Avoidants rarely announce their emotional exhaustion. They internalize it. They distance gradually. They become quieter, less expressive, less available. By the time most people realize what's happening, the avoidant has already emotionally stepped back. So if you are with an avoidant who is showing these rare behaviors, don't measure them against someone who loves differently. Don't dismiss their growth because it doesn't look dramatic. Don't assume their silence means absence of feeling. Look at their patterns. Look at their consistency. Look at the ways they step toward you instead of away. Because the avoidant who is trying for you is not common. The avoidant who lets you in is not common. The avoidant who stays, who explains, who includes you in their future, who returns after space, who shares fears, that is not the norm. That is someone who has decided that you are worth confronting their deepest discomfort. And that kind of decision is not easy for them. If you have that person in your life, understand the weight of what they're offering. It may not come wrapped in constant words. It may not be overflowing with emotional intensity, but it is intentional. It is careful. It is real. And sometimes the rarest love is the one that doesn't shout the loudest, but stays. And when you truly understand the weight of what an avoidant is offering, you start to see the relationship differently. You stop measuring it by how loud the emotions are, and you start measuring it by how much courage it takes for them to stay. Because for an avoidant, staying is not always the easy choice. It often feels like the risky one. The 16th thing you need to understand is how to nurture this kind of connection. An avoidant who is showing these rare behaviors is already stepping outside their comfort zone. They are already stretching themselves emotionally, so the environment you create around them matters more than you realize. Avoidants don't grow through pressure. They don't open up faster because someone demands it. In fact, pressure usually has the opposite effect. It makes them feel trapped, criticized, or inadequate. And once they feel that way, their instinct is to retreat. What helps an avoidant stay open is emotional safety, calm conversations instead of explosive ones, understanding instead of constant criticism, patience instead of urgency. When they feel that they can be themselves without being judged for their slower emotional pace, they relax. And when they relax, they open up more naturally. They begin to associate the relationship with peace instead of pressure, with acceptance instead of expectation, and that's when their effort grows. That's when they start sharing more, staying longer, and investing deeper. Not because they're forced to, but because they feel safe enough to want to. The 17th thing is what happens if you push them too hard. When an avoidant feels overwhelmed emotionally, their nervous system shifts into protection mode. They start to feel like the relationship is demanding more than they can give. They begin to feel trapped, misunderstood, or emotionally drained. And when that happens, they don't always argue. They don't always explain. They don't always give warnings. They simply start to pull back. The messages become shorter, the conversations become more surface level, the emotional openness disappears. They spend more time alone, they become less responsive, less expressive, less present. To someone on the outside, it may look like they just lost interest, but internally, it's often a defense mechanism. It's their way of regaining control and emotional balance. They're not trying to hurt you, they're trying to protect themselves. And if that pressure continues, something more permanent can happen. They stop trying, they stop opening up, they stop investing, and once an avoidant reaches that point, it's very hard to bring them back. The 18th thing is the quiet moment they emotionally detach. This is something most people never see coming. Avoidants don't usually have dramatic breakups. They don't always express their dissatisfaction openly. Their detachment often happens silently, over time. It starts with small emotional withdrawals, less sharing, less curiosity, less effort. They begin to feel numb toward the connection, not because they never cared, but because caring started to feel unsafe or exhausting. Inside, they begin to convince themselves that they're better off alone. They remind themselves of the comfort of independence. They tell themselves that relationships are too complicated, too demanding, too painful. And by the time they physically leave, the emotional separation has already happened. To you, it may feel sudden, but to them, it was a slow internal process. That's why understanding their effort, while it's still there, is so important. Because once an avoidant fully detaches, they rarely come back in the same way. Even if they return, they may not open up like they once did. The walls become thicker. The distance becomes greater. The vulnerability becomes harder to access. The 19th thing is why this kind of avoidant is so rare. Most avoidants never reach the stage where they consistently show these 8 signs. Many stay emotionally distant their entire lives, not because they're incapable of love, but because fear always wins. Fear of dependence, fear of being hurt, fear of losing control, fear of needing someone who might leave. So when you meet an avoidant who is actively trying, who is stepping outside their comfort zone, who is letting you see their fears, who is returning after distance, who is including you in their future, you are not dealing with a typical situation. You are dealing with someone who is growing, someone who is fighting their own instincts, someone who is slowly rewriting the emotional rules they've lived by for years. And people like that don't come around often because emotional growth, especially for an avoidant, takes courage. It takes self-awareness. It takes effort. And not everyone is willing to go through that internal struggle. So if you find an avoidant who is doing these things for you, you're not just in a relationship. You're witnessing a transformation, and that transformation is fragile. It needs understanding. It needs patience. It needs appreciation. The 20th and final thing is the message you need to carry with you. Never lose an avoidant who is truly trying for you. Not because avoidants are perfect, not because you should accept unhealthy behavior, but because effort from someone who fears closeness is one of the most honest forms of love. Anyone can love when it feels easy. Anyone can be affectionate when there's no risk. But when someone who is wired to keep distance chooses closeness with you, it means something deeper is happening. It means you feel safe to them. It means they trust you in ways they don't trust most people. It means they're willing to challenge their own fears just to keep you in their life. And that is rare. So instead of focusing only on what they're not giving, look at what they are giving. Look at the quiet consistency. Look at the subtle effort. Look at the moments they choose connection over comfort. Because one day, if that effort disappears, you may realize just how rare it was. You may realize that the person you thought was distant was actually offering something steady and real. Something that didn't come with drama, but came with loyalty. And by then, it might be too late to get it back. So if you have an avoidant who is showing these 8 rare signs, don't take it lightly. Don't rush them. Don't compare them. Don't overlook the courage it takes for them to stay. Sometimes the rarest love is the one that grows quietly, behind guarded walls, until one day you realize that someone who feared closeness chose you anyway.